and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn, and today I'm crafting with Simon Hurley's Sketch Citrus stamp set. This is actually one large stamp. It is 6x6 and it is a red rubber stamp. It does come with a set of coordinating dies, which you can get as a bundle together if you'd like. And one of the cool things about this stamp set is that I continue to reference it as a set because you can actually pop out some of the stamp and stamp out individual elements. So you are getting multiple stamps, but configured, they all make this gorgeous background. I crafted with some mica powder in the one of my wax seal videos, and a viewer left a comment that she has a lot of mica and she just never knows what to do with it. And so I thought that I would make this video to show different things that you can do with your mica powders. So I have pulled out three colors, a yellow, an orange, and a little bit of a red, and I am mixing the powders together with clear fine detail embossing powder. So the clear powder is wonderful because it's not going to add or change the color too much, and the mica will tint your embossing powder essentially. Because mica does not inherently have a binding agent mixed in with it, it's just the ground up minerals, you do need something that will help it to adhere onto your project. And in this case, the clear embossing powder is going to be what will hold the mica powder onto our cardstock. And so I'm going to do some heat embossing in the same way that you would normally. So I inked up my stamp with some clear Versamark ink. That's a sticky ink that is clear. And then I am going to pour my custom made embossing powder right over top of this. You will notice that the mica itself is going to leave a little bit of residue on your card, and the sticky ink will grab onto that newly mixed embossing powder that we created. But you can see that even as I knock off excess embossing powder, there's still a little bit of that orange tint to the cardstock, and that is just that could be some of the embossing powder that's held on to those areas, but it also might just be mica. So after I get this melted, what I will do is just give this a good wipe, and that way any of the mica powder that was sticking to the cardstock will actually wipe off, and you'll bring your cardstock back to a nice white if that's what you're embossing onto. Some mica powders might sort of stain your cardstock a little bit more than others. So for example, I did have a little bit of red mixed into my custom mix there, and so that actually might stain the cardstock a little bit, but by and large, I didn't feel like there was actually too much of that happening. I just like to I actually use a Swiffer cloth because and you can see some of that mica powder come right off. So that's just powder that hasn't been melted, because mica powder is very, very fine. And it kind of depends. Some mica powders are a little larger than others, and so it really just depends, but you can see as I wipe that off, it brings it back to the nice white. And we've just made some custom colored embossing powder. So now you can actually make embossing powders to fit your project. And if you use mica in other applications, as I will do in a little bit to finish up this card, everything can be really well coordinated, and because you've made it all custom yourself from the same mica powders. So what I will do next, because there's so much open white space, I thought what might look nice is to distress the edge and give this a little bit of a border. And since I did have a little bit of leftover powder, I like to try to only mix up as much as I need. But if you are making a custom blend that you know you're gonna love and that you want to have a lot of, you could definitely do that. This will store perfectly well. And but I was just wanting to use this up as much as possible, and then I probably won't save it because I tried pretty hard to only mix up as much as I needed. It is nice to go a little bit more than you need because if you are like me and you're just sort of winging it in terms of creating your custom mix, you might not be able to get exactly that same color again. But it just depends on how precise you are when you're creating your mix. If you are able to or want to weigh everything out precisely, you could definitely make some custom mixes and in a way that you can replicate it again if you wanted to make that exact blend again. Then here's another way that I like to use my mica powders. So I've just put a little drop of gum arabic dissolved in water. I like to mix it at a 1-to-1 ratio by weight. So that's the same weight of powdered gum arabic dissolved in some warm water, and I just always keep a little glass jar full and use it by the dropper, for example, here. And gum arabic is a binding agent, and so by mixing that solution of gum arabic and water with my mica powder, I can create a sort of a paint that I can then paint with, and that gum arabic is going to be what will hold the mica powder onto my project. Otherwise, if you only mixed water with mica, you might have some of that color be able to paint beautifully, and some of it might, as I was mentioning, kind of stain your paper a little bit, and that just will depend on the color. But it's going to be subject to easily being wiped off, just as I did with that Swiffer cloth after I did the heat emboss. However, by painting with a solution that has a binding agent like gum arabic, you might get a little bit of that mica wiping off, but by and large, it will stick to your substrate. In this case, I'm just painting onto cardstock. That is going to depend a little bit on the substrate that you are painting on. If you're painting on something that is non-porous, it may not stick as well. But if you're painting on just plain paper or cardstock, then gum arabic should work beautifully. And I am painting in layers so that I can get a little bit of shadows, a little bit of highlight. Just by going over the same areas multiple times, I can darken and have those areas feel a little bit more like shadow. And so that's another really fun way to work with your mica powders. And I thought I wanted to also show that you can create, very similarly, you can create your own custom colored or pearlescent cardstock. So mica does have that very lovely pearlescent sheen. And all I've done here is just the exact same thing that I did before when I was coloring in the oranges. I put a couple of drops of my gum arabic and water solution, and I've mixed my mica powder in with that, and I just painted this little scrap section of cardstock here. I want to actually put my sentiment onto this this little strip of cardstock, but because the background, I've left it fairly open with a lot of white space, I wanted the sentiment to be the inverse of that. So I wanted the background to be in that lovely tangerine orange color that we created, and the sentiment to be white. And I felt that would actually make the sentiment read a little bit better. So I've gone ahead and I let that, I did let the cardstock that I created, that pearlescent cardstock I created, I did let that dry a little bit before actually, again, stamping with a clear Versamark ink and then using a fine white detail embossing powder to emboss my sentiment. And so there are a couple of different ways that you can use mica powders and in your paper crafting, in your card making. You can create your own custom embossing powders with it. You can color with it, and you can even create your own pearlescent specialty cardstock with it. And because we mixed our own colors, everything on this card is going to be pretty well coordinated because it uses all of the same mica powders, just in different ratios. So I tried to use a slightly darker with a little bit more of the red mixed in for the outline stamp that I originally heat embossed. And for coloring in the oranges, I left red out completely so that it would be a little bit lighter, and that way you almost have that look of a no line coloring. And so, but it still uses the same orange and the same yellows that I used in the custom embossing powder. So everything still is within the same palette and it still matches beautifully. And with my specialty cardstock that I created, I wanted to have that be a little bit darker just to make sure that the white sentiment stood out against that background. So for that piece, I did add a little bit of that red, just aiming to be the same as or similar to the embossing powder that I made earlier. So here's a look at that final card. It's got some really lovely sheen to it because the clear embossing adds a sheen to it, but mica itself is very pearlescent, so even the coloring and that little sentiment strip has a lovely sparkle as well. I hope you enjoyed these different ideas for how you can be using mica powder on your projects. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye!